So it's been a little while since we put out a video. Part of that is we went on vacation, but also I've been absolutely swamped with construction work. So I work a full-time job and I do construction on the side, constantly busy. So just kind of as a public service announcement, if your kids don't know what they want to do in college or kind of what they want to do in life, or if you just want them out of your house by the time they're 40, I would definitely look into the trades because there is tons of work out there. So you remember from the last video, I got all the drywall hung in this little cubby. And what I'm going to be doing is finishing the drywall, which means I'm going to be adding the metal edges to the corners, and I'm going to be adding tape and then putting the top bond over it. So it'll just be a flat wall that can be primed and painted. And I'm going to focus on this little cubby because it's going to show outside corners, the metal edging, and inside corners. And then of course vertical joints, horizontal joints. And there's also going to be a couple places that I'm going to pre-fill where the gaps are pretty big and you want to make sure that there's no bubbles. If you don't get enough mud behind the tape, it'll bubble. That's where that comes from generally. So I'm going to start pre-filling, get the metal edges on, and then I'll start taping. So keep in mind I do these videos for homeowners, so I'm going to show you the materials that I use to get really professional results. There's tons of materials out there, and instead of sitting there trying to memorize each type or using this for that, I just basically have the materials that I use and I get good results all the time. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is adding this corner bead to these outside corners. And this just kind of covers up that gap and any imperfections. And all you do is just kind of gently lay this in place. This is metal and it will bend in and out, but you want to be really careful that you don't disform it. And what I mean by disforming the metal is it has a straight edge and then it kind of has this bump here and then it has another straight edge. And so you want to make sure that this kind of creates a 90-degree corner. And then there'll be this little bump out, and then all of that will all get filled full of drywall mud and make a flat surface. And this metal cuts real easy. You just use little snips to cut it. And there's holes throughout, but I usually just use the small holes and use drywall screws to anchor to the wall. A lot of the metal corner can be installed without using a tape measure. Just kind of set the metal corner up and line it up to where you want it and just make your cut. And then go ahead and install it. One thing you'll notice when you're done with the metal edging is there won't be any screw heads that pop out past the edge of the metal, so you'll be able to fill that in with mud without any issues. Your corners don't have to be mitered or anything, but just make sure that they line up really well. And here, I had to go further than 10 feet, which is the length of the outside corner that I got. So what I did is I just put my little piece here at the end, and I'll be able to float the mud over that and you won't see it. And it would look a lot better than if you were to put it in the middle of a room or in the middle of a cubby. So I always use the drywall mud that has the blue lid on it. It's kind of kind of like an all-around good drywall mud. So whenever you buy the pre-mixed mud, you always want to make sure that you mix up the mud really well. And for that, I would get an actual mixing drill. So I got this at Harbor Freight. It's a Bauer brand. This thing's pretty much indestructible. Didn't cost that much. And then this is the drywall mixer that you use with the drill. If you're just gonna be doing a small project and you already have a drill and you don't wanna invest in another drill, what you can do is get your regular drill, which I burn up screwing around doing this kind of stuff, trying to mix up full buckets with just a regular drill. But what you can do is get your regular drill, and they make smaller mixers, but only maybe mix up a third of the bucket. Add a little bit of water, mix up about a third of the bucket, and then use that. And then you can see, you'll be able to tell what's mixed and what isn't mixed when you get down to that point. Then you'll just remix just a little bit again. So from left to right, you have a 4-inch, 6-inch, 8-inch, and a 12-inch mud knife. The 4-inch mud knife you want to use for taping, and that's because it fits in that little beveled groove that I've been yammering on about for the last video and a half. And then the 6-inch mud knife will help you in your corners, kind of feather out the edge. The 8-inch mud knife will help you feather out the corners. And the 12-inch mud knife is to smooth out any flat surfaces. So notice all the knives are pretty shiny. I've had these for a while and they're actually pretty expensive, but I would not get cheap tools if you're gonna do a lot of drywalling, like if you're gonna be remodeling your house. And really, for that matter, I'd probably just get one good mud knife or a couple good mud knives and just take care of them, and they'll last you for a long time. If you get the blue steel stuff, they'll just start rusting and you'll just have all kinds of problems. So you're definitely gonna need a mud pan. Once again, I'd get a really good stainless steel one. I wouldn't go get the plastic one with a metal edge. Just go get a good stainless steel one and just keep it in your tool collection. Something else that's really handy is this little bucket scoop. Has the same contour as the bucket. So I'm gonna be using 2 types of tape to finish my drywall. The one you're probably pretty familiar with, seen something like this, just regular paper tape. And the other type of tape is just like the paper tape, except for it has these metal strips. So what you'll do is you'll go ahead and bend this tape, and these will go in the corners, and the metal goes to the inside of the corner. So you'll put your mud in, stick these into the corner, you'll have your paper side on the outside, and it'll make a really nice straight corner. This stuff's pretty expensive for what it is, but you get really professional results with this. So if you're brand new to doing this drywall stuff, I'd probably definitely fill that. Kind of anything over 1/4 of an inch I'd fill. Definitely where the braces are at, definitely kind of throw some mud in there, just so the mud doesn't have to be as deep behind the tape. So if you do have to pre-fill any gaps, make sure that all of that mud dries completely. So like tonight, I threw a little bit of mud in there. It's getting really late, so I'm gonna go in, get ready for work tomorrow, another long day tomorrow, and then come back tomorrow evening and I'll get this taped. So the first thing you're going to want to do before you start taping is prep your mud. The pre-mixed mud kind of gets a little bit chunky, and so you're going to add a little bit of water and mix it up really well. So I do suggest applying the tape in a certain order. So you should always start by taping your beveled edges first, and the reason is your tape is going to lay in that little bevel, and then when your corner bead comes through, your corner tape comes by, it'll actually ride over that beveled edge. The paper tape kind of has a seam in the middle, so what I'll do is I'll push that seam right into the middle of the gap between the 2 boards, and then it'll make sure that the tape lays flat. Remember, the big key is to get enough drywall mud into that gap and then enough behind the paper so it doesn't bubble. So as you can see, the tape is really tight to the wall. Definitely got enough mud behind it. And I've seen people, a lot of professional guys, they'll go and actually create a whole strip to cover the screws. The reason I don't do that, and you'll see when you get ready to sand, the way I look at it is every bit of drywall mud that you put on this wall, you have to potentially sand. And so I just do the little spots because they're a lot easier to sand instead of sitting there with, trying to sand large areas and potentially miss something. So these corners, you'll see later, are actually just going to get filled in with mud. And anywhere where the drywall comes together, I will have to put a piece of tape. But where that little bump sticks out on this wall is all going to be full of drywall mud. And so I just kind of discard the little bit of extra drywall mud in places where I know I'm going to be building it up later. So sometimes you'll get little mistakes like this, and the issue is there's like a little flap of paper there, which can mess up your finish. So what I usually do is just take the knife, just create a little dimple to push all the paper in, and just throw a little bit of mud in there, and it's fixed. You want to be very careful when finishing these corners. The corner of the knife will definitely cut that paper. And once you get to this point, then you just wait about 24 hours and then you can come back and start recoating. I just wanted to point out, you'll notice that I didn't go all the way to the floor.
one with the drywall or the tape. And the reason is I don't want the drywall to wick up any moisture. And with the tape, the baseboard is going to cover that little bit of area there. And so you don't need to go all the way to the floor.
Taping butt joints, or where two non-beveled edges come together, is done just the same as with the beveled edges, but you'll see that finishing these joints is a lot harder than finishing beveled edges. So for the first recoat over the tape, I'm going to be using a 6-inch mud knife and an 8-inch mud knife. The 6-inch mud knife is going to be used to go over the screw holes, and it's also going to be used to finish one side of the inside corners. And then the 8-inch knife is going to be used to recoat all of the flat beveled edges, and it'll also go over the outside corners. So the first thing I want you to remember is that these mud knives will cut your tape, so be really careful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scoop my mud out of the pan, and I'm going to put mud on about 3/4 of the knife. And I'm going to have this corner pretty tight to the board, and then this inside edge is just going to run down the inside of this corner. And I'm going to touch the corner, but I'm not going to cut into the corner. Make sure if you need to remix your mud, you remix it, because this is the finished portion of the drywall, and every little flaw is going to show. So you notice all the tape is covered, and there isn't a whole lot of mud out here at the edge. And you don't want a lot of mud out here because remember, you have to sand a lot of this down to get this to fade into the board. This little bit of drywall mud that stays here in the inside, you can kind of chip it off after it dries. And if it's low enough like this is, I usually just run mud right over when I mud the other side. So you'll notice that I chose to coat this side first, and the reason is because I want to be able to get a coat of mud on this flat beveled edge here. When I mud flat surfaces, what I'll do is I'll scoop mud and I'll just kind of clean off the mud on either side of the knife, and then that'll give me a bunch of mud to fill in to cover up the tape, and it won't have a lot of mud on the outside. So using a 12-inch knife, I want to show you how flat this is. So there's just a little bit of a mark there. So what you want to do is keep this mud pretty flat, and you want to build it up, but you don't want to make a hump here, because remember, there's that bevel, and all you're doing is just filling in the mud in that bevel over the tape. So you should end up with a pretty flat joint. Before recoating your outside corners, make sure you just kind of run your knife along the metal. Don't dig into the metal or the mud, but just kind of run along there just to knock any little high spots off. And then what you need to keep in mind with these corners, they're going to take a lot of mud. You have to fill this whole section in with mud. A lot of guys won't, and you'll kind of see kind of like these not square. They'll kind of be like pressed in, or especially on the sides here, it'll be the same thing. It won't be a nice straight edge kind of feathered into the wall. They'll just kind of be like this circle, and it looks really bad. It really shows. So I've just thrown a lot of mud at the wall, and it doesn't look great. This is going to take multiple coats. So what I'm going to do is little spots like this that are kind of hanging off from the wall. When all of this dries, I'm going to run my knife along the edges, along the metal edges here, and bust all that off, and I'll recoat it. And that's going to smooth a lot of this kind of stuff out, because right now, obviously it looks like garbage. These outside corners, they're kind of just like having two inside corners. You're just going to have to decide what you want to do. If you want to do the outside portion of that little ledge there first, or do you want to do the two inside edges that are against the ceiling and the wall. I usually start and try to get a bunch of mud filled in along that metal edge, because I know it's going to take a lot of mud. So I like to get a bunch of mud on there, get that outside corner there finished, or at least get a coat on there, and then start working on the outside portions. And the two sides with the metal edging, they're actually both less than 6 inches, so I'm going to go ahead and use my 6-inch knife just because I have a little bit more control. I'm going to recoat the screws one more time using the 6-inch knife, And after this coat, I should be finished with putting mud over the screw holes. So remember with this section, remember I hung the drywall so there was a bevel at the very bottom. And I'm going to show you why that's a problem. I just did it to prove a point. But you're going to see that the bevel, if you don't fill that in with mud, there's going to be uneven surface when you go to hang trim there. So once you get to this point, then you need to wait until all of the drywall mud is this color right here, that light white. You'll know that it's completely dry. If you don't quite hate drywall right now, you will if you try to recoat it too soon. Recoating these ceiling butt joints are going to be a real chore because the mud actually has to extend 18 inches on either side of the tape. And that's because the tape sits on top of the drywall and you want to feather out the drywall mud so it's not noticeable. I'm going to lay mud right over the tape, and then when I take the second pass on either side, it's going to kind of be feathered out kind of to the height of the flat mud that I put in the middle, and then feathered out to the drywall on the edges. So right now we're about 24 inches wide. You'll also notice I took the mud out past the edge of the tape on the end because of course the tape on the end is also sticking up on top of the drywall, and so you also have to feather out that end as well. And then using a 12-inch knife, I'm going to go over all the beveled edges. I needed some power over here, so I put the outlet in, but I certainly wouldn't recommend putting the outlets in first because then you run into this problem. So just kind of have to improvise here. So when I'm finishing these joints, I'm just putting drywall mud pretty thin over the entire joint, and then over the middle I'll just run the knife straight over flat. And then in the edge, this is kind of exaggerated, but I'm actually bending the knife so I can get a nice feathered edge and blend it into the mud in the middle. So when you go to sand, and I'll show you how to do this later in the video, you'll start sanding the edges and then you'll go over the top just kind of lightly, and then I'll create like a nice beveled edge, but you won't see any of that. It'll just look flat, even though the middle will just be just a tiny bit higher. So remember, you're gonna go chip off all of the high spots, or like little dried up pieces that are sticking on top. You'll knock all those off, and then you're gonna finish all three edges, but I'm gonna use a 12-inch knife instead of an 8-inch knife. I filled in that bunch of drywall mud between the little metal edge bevel and the wall, and so I shouldn't need a whole lot of mud, even with this 12-inch knife. So as you can see, this corner is far from perfect. Still has a few little pieces sticking off. And I mean, it's pretty flat, but it still needs a little bit of work. So it's gonna get recoated one more time. So what you're looking for in these corners, you can see how there's a little bit of drywall mud over that metal. If you really want sharp corners, then what you wanna do is keep coating this. Hopefully in one more coat, it'll pretty much be all filled in. And it'll leave the little bit of mud on top of the metal edging, and it'll actually leave a straight corner. So when you go to sand, you don't want to sand all that mud off, you just want to sand flat, and it'll give you that nice square corner. So this outside corner here at the top is going to be finished just like that wall that I showed you. Of course, it only has 2 sides instead of 3. And in this inside corner, before you coat the other side, there might be a little bit of drywall mud in here. You don't have to get all of it, but anything that's going to make the drywall mud look, you know, so it's not flat, and maybe make it bulge out a little bit in a few spots, just go ahead and knock that off. And then once you're done, you're going to coat the other side of the wall here. And what you don't want to do is dig into this other wall. You want to get a thin layer of mud on there and then flatten it out and leave it. And if you sit there and keep working at it, you're going to put a little bit of moisture into this other wall, and you're going to start digging that mud out, and then you're going to have a real issue. And the reason drywall is kind of hard to finish is if you see that outside corner there, it's going to be difficult for me to recoat that outside corner and then also coat the inside corner there. They do have a little tool that it's like a 90-degree angle tool to where you put mud on there and you smooth it out. I don't really like that much. I don't think it turns out that nice. But I guess if you're in a hurry, you could use that tool. But what I do is, whenever I'm doing a job like this, is just come home after work, re-mud everything, wait another day, and come back and do the other side. Drywall, if you want it to turn out really well, it's just all about patience. And so I can sit here and recoat these inside corners, and then once that dries, I can go coat the outside corners again. And of course, there's gonna be a little imperfection, so it might require another coat. But like I said, if you want your drywall to be super nice, it just takes a lot of patience, and it's really not that much work. It's just being patient and get everything smoothed out the way it should be. So this is gonna be the third coat on the flat surfaces and on these edges. And then I'm gonna finish up that butt joint. The joint's actually gonna be about 3 feet wide when I finish. These flat joints are actually gonna be probably about 1 inch wider than they are right now. And I'm gonna make sure that I feather the mud. I don't know how well you can see it, but it kind of looks like it's built up a little bit here. That's actually gonna be feathered down quite a bit, so it'll make it easier to sand. In the corners, same thing. It's kind of rough here. That's gonna be feathered out. And another trick I forgot to mention when it comes to corners or any type of flat spot, make sure that you kind of work the mud towards the middle. So when you go to sand, you'll be able to sand it out, but you won't mess up any of your corners or anything. You'll pretty much have it flat, and right about here at eye level, you'll see where you need to sand everything out flat. Same thing in the corner. Make sure that whenever you finish up your joint, you're kind of ending in the middle, and then you can just kind of sand that out. You'll know everything else is good. So a good craftsman never blames his or her tools, but I was thinking while I was doing these corner joints that I really have gotten bad at this for some reason. And what it is actually, there's actually 2 different knives. This is the one that I usually use, and this is the one that I was using the other day when I did the corners. So I don't know if you can tell, but this one has a lot straighter edge before it starts coming over. And this one kind of almost just straight comes over almost immediately. So I would recommend getting a knife like this. So when you're doing the corners, you're gonna be able to hold the mud against the corner a lot more. When I was trying to do the corners here, the mud kept coming out and around. And so definitely whenever you get any type of mud knife, 4-inch probably doesn't make that big a difference, but 6 and an 8-inch, make sure that it's more flat here whenever you're gonna do corners. And one last thing, make sure that your mud is mixed up really well, and make sure that your drywall tools and pan are pretty clean, because you don't want to cause any crusted material or dried up material to start causing streaks, and you'll have to go back and recoat it again. So everything should be pretty smooth. All the tools should be pretty clean. So the most important thing you can do, if you don't like sanding, is make sure that you put the effort into getting the mud on the wall pretty flat. So when I got up there, I realized that the tape was completely covered by drywall mud, so I really didn't have to coat the middle. I could have just feathered out the edges, but I just threw a quick skim coat over it, and that's all gonna sand out pretty even. You won't even know that there was a butt joint there. So I'm gonna get ready to do the worst part of drywall, which is sanding. So I've tried using a mask and goggles before, and it always seems to fuck up the goggles when I wear the mask. So what I actually started using was one of these masks. You can see I've used it for spring insulation and drywall, and abused it pretty bad. 3M makes one of these, and I got this one off from Amazon. Basically just doesn't have the 3M on the face of it. It's kind of a knockoff or whatever. It's probably made in the same factory, but they're super cheap. They're only about $40, where the 3M ones are like 80 or 90 bucks. With these canisters, they don't really matter. What you want to do if you're going to do it this way is make sure that you keep these paper filters clean. So I can usually get a couple hours of sanding, and then I'll just pull the cover off, replace the little paper filter there, and then keep sanding. I'm going to be sanding with these sanding blocks. A lot of them will have a more coarse side and a fine side, and then on the sides there'll be a coarse side and a fine side. And then they have one that has some angles to it that you can use for sanding corners. So I'll give you a quick demonstration of how I sand. You can also get sanders that they actually go on a pole, do the pole sanding. I like these a lot better just because I can quickly go and sand and make sure that there aren't any imperfections as I'm working. So in sanding, obviously you don't want to sand completely flat, because whatever flaw that you were trying to cover, or the nail hole or the tape or whatever you were doing, is sitting inside that mud. So you don't want to take it all the way down completely flat. And so how I get around that is I'll sand on the outside of everything real fast until it's a nice feathered edge, and then I'll just lightly go over the top. And same principle with your flat joints. So in sanding the corners, I'll take the block and find the less abrasive side and then the more abrasive side on the front face here. You are going to dig into the other side a little bit, but then what I do is just go and just sand out the little mark that I made, and you end up having a nice square corner. Same thing with the edges. Make sure you sand the edges really well, and then just kind of work your way into where you sand it into the corner. And I don't know how well you can see that, but it's just a super straight, nice, flat, even corner. And the outside corners are a little bit tricky because you don't want to take off that little bit of mud that's sitting on the metal, because that's going to give you your sharp corner. So take your least abrasive side and just kind of gently go up and down the wall here until it looks pretty uniform. Then go to the other side. Do the same thing. So this part in here is pretty much perfect. You can see down below how some of that mud chipped off. So I'll just run a little bit of mud over this one section and then sand it back out. So any spots that I know I'm gonna have to fix, what I'll do is I'll lightly take a pencil and just make a mark here. So once I'm at this step, I'll use this coloring gel, and all you do is just add a little bit of this to your joint compound, and it'll color the compound. And so whenever you go fix your flaws, then you'll be able to see where you've made repairs and you need to go back and sand. So I think the way this is really intended to be used, and I've done this on bigger jobs, is I'll tint a whole 5-gallon bucket. So I'll just use the untinted drywall mud. So I'll go ahead and tape, and then I'll use the untinted drywall mud to put my first coat on, and then I'll switch buckets and go to my tinted drywall mud and cover everything up, and then I'll come back with a white drywall mud and then cover everything. And so then I can kind of tell where I'm at in the mudding process, make sure that I didn't miss anything. As I said, I've used this on big jobs to where I'll be going around a big room and I'll be able to tell where I've mudded and where I haven't mudded. But I generally like using this the most just for covering up imperfections. But it does work pretty well for coating walls as well. So at this point, we pretty much have all of the drywall hung. I have most of the metal corners up, so I got a couple more corners to put on. And got a lot of it taped here. And since I've kind of been living in here for the last year and a half, been doing projects and things, I can't just kind of wholesale just drop everything and just do all the drywall. So what I'm gonna do is get to about the middle, get everything taped and finished on one side, put some plastic on one side, and then sand all this, and then get ready to paint it. And our plan is in the future, we're going to put out a compilation video from start to finish of everything that we've done inside the building. So watch for that. It'll probably be maybe in a couple months, we'll hope to have it out. So I ordered a power sander, and in the next video, I'm gonna be using the power sander to sand a lot of the building that I have done. So I'll be demonstrating how to use that and just doing a quick review on the one that I bought. So whenever you're done sanding, one of the most important things you wanna do is clean up really, really well, and especially brush all the walls down, either with a soft bristle broom or just a rag or something. Make sure you get most of that dust off, because when you start to prime and paint, it can actually start gathering a bunch of that dust and cause a bunch of garbage to build up on the walls. We've also had a lot of people reach out to us over the past few months about different types of electrical configurations and maybe how to complete different types of projects in their house. So if it seems like we've been ignoring you, we've kind of been giving this some thought, thinking about how we're gonna accomplish this. So maybe in within the next 10 videos, probably 6 of them are gonna be strictly just taking at random just different projects that people have asked about and actually describing how to do them. And then of course I'll be using the wires and the outlets and switches and things just like I've done in previous videos. to show how to complete these projects in your own house. So if you're one of the people that have asked electrical questions, make sure you're watching for those videos coming up. And even if you haven't, just try to use some of the principles that are in the videos to maybe complete your own projects. They may not be exactly what you may have going on, but just using the different principles that I'm trying to get people to understand, you might be able to complete the project on your own. We're grateful for everyone who supported our channel, and we appreciate watching.